This is the Rebels and Revolutionaries podcast, and today we'll be covering the birth of America. On this episode, we aim to provide a balanced exploration of the American Revolution by presenting both the British and American perspectives, highlighting the motivations, key events, and lasting impacts from each side to offer a comprehensive understanding of this pivotal historical event. Right now, we'll start with the French and Indian War.
So the French and Indian War can be seen as the first event that kind of led to the snowball effect that was the American Revolution. It started with the British troops. They had access to many more troops because there was 2 million settlers compared to the 60,000 French settlers. So an easy victory was expected. The British wanted to control crucial French colonial land in America and expand westward, which would allow them to gain more power, gain more land, and secure their interest in the New World. Britain and France were already established enemies as well, fighting over back in Europe. So this was another way to combat them and gain an advantage over them. And they expected the colonies to contribute because it would also benefit them. It would give them more land and more opportunities and just areas to improve upon. So it really was for the best of both worlds, for the colonists and the loyalists back home.
Yeah, and one of the major events to come out of the French and Indian War was the Proclamation of 1763, which prohibited the colonists from moving past an established line by the British monarchy. This obviously angered many of the colonists as they felt that they had dedicated so much of their lives and so much of their time to the war that they felt that they should be rewarded with the spoils of it. And not being able to move past this line and settle the land truly angered a lot of them, and this started a lot of the dissent that the colonists began to have with the British monarchy.
And the colonists' anger also was due to new taxes that were placed on them in order to pay off the war debts. Great Britain thought that it was fair, since the war was fought on their land for them, that they should pay off the debt. And the Stamp Act was placed on the colonists, and that's one of the things that really upset them. And it kind of started like the list of events that would go down in America, and just kind of snowballed up into a revolution.
Yeah, and these first couple of things that the colonists were angry at led to the creation of the Sons of Liberty, which is really the first big rebellious group. Many of his actions involved things like riots and destruction of British property. So Parliament saw it as an illegal group, and it was really one of the first major rebellious groups that Britain had to act against. They saw it as a big rejection of the British Parliament's authority over the colonies, so they had to deal with it as soon as they could.
Yeah, many of the Stamp Acts were seen as also just justified due to the fact that it was on colonial land and also benefited them. And
another thing that really made the colonists upset was that British troops stayed occupying in the colonies. Like, some of them never left. And so British soldiers kind of had more control over their lives. And then the British Parliament was able to enforce their rule over the colonies.
Which amendment did that end up being? I forget.
The fourth.
Amendment.
A big part of that is, due to the destruction of British property and just soil and all their establishments that were in the New World, they had no choice but to quarter troops.
Yeah,
which was
absolutely.
a big option because it was either that or watch all their embassies and buildings get destroyed and burned, and it was very tough situation, especially to be one of those British soldiers that was being quartered, because they're seen very looked down upon by a lot.
Yeah, and you also have to think about the greater global context. Like, they have like one of the largest colonies in America at the time. Obviously, there are other countries attempting to settle the new Americas as well. So definitely, like, they didn't want to lose those colonies, as they were like so important to their economy as well. So.
And moving on past those other huge events before the Revolutionary War would be the Boston Tea Party and the Boston Massacre, which are two of the most well-known events. So if we can kind of run down what went down.
So I would say, starting at the Boston Massacre, from the British perspective, there was, I believe, 4, maybe 5 British soldiers when an entire mob came at them, and they're throwing snowballs and they're throwing all these things, and then they started taking bricks and covering them in snow and then throwing bricks at the British soldiers. And when one of the British soldiers was hit with this brick, his gun fired, And so that led to the rest of the soldiers firing upon the mob crowd that was attacking them. So it wasn't self-defense, and it was mainly antagonized by the angry Americans.
Yeah, obviously this became like a huge source of propaganda for the revolutionary movement, as many newspapers depicted the event as British soldiers just simply firing onto a crowd of unarmed Americans. So this was definitely like, I forget how many people died in it.
Around 3 or 4.
Yeah,
It wasn't many. It
Yeah.
wasn't many. The word massacre was used very, very generously.
Yeah, it plays the propaganda part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so and then just the newspapers attempted to like depict the victims as like martyrs for the revolutionary movement as well. So yeah.
Yeah, moving on, what led up to the Boston Tea Party was really the Tea Act, which the British made as another tax to help support one of their failing big companies, the British East India Company, which really helped support a lot of the British economy. And it was really important for that company because this Tea Act allowed that company to sell directly to the colonies. And really, they believed this would be another tax that would overall benefit the colonists because they could buy the tea for cheaper. They wouldn't have to go through a middleman between the company and getting their tea.
The colonists clearly did not like this. The Sons of Liberty actually planned the event, and they dressed up as Native Americans and snuck onto the ships and tossed overboard tons and tons of tea that was property of the British. And so the tea was wasted, and just a ton of like millions of dollars were lost, and millions of dollars back then, which would be worth so much more today. So it kind of stirred the pot a lot, and then led into what we're going to get into, the first shots of the war, which is the Battle of Lexington and Concord. So that kind of started off, and we had the shot heard around the world, which is a well-known event.
Yeah, this is coming after the First Continental Congress, which is where we kind of start to see the first active resistance in organized fashion to the British government in a government sense. And then that was what kind of led to the leading and creation of local militias. And the British government went into there with the troops, and they thought they severely underestimated the powers that the colonists had. They went in there to seize any muskets and weapons they had, and were severely ambushed by the fighting power that the colonists possessed. We suffered many unexpected casualties by the colonists, and it's what started the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, one thing else I want to talk about is kind of like how the colonists developed like their own style of like guerrilla warfare. Like previously, battles were fought in like lines where you would simply fire, reload, and then allow the other side to fire as well. But the colonists started using more like quote like dishonorable methods. Like they would hide and attack the British soldiers. They would raid their supply depots and like destroy all their food or like ammunition and whatnot. So definitely like it was a lot. It was a lot harder for the British soldiers to defend against the colonists, as like this was a type of warfare that like they had never encountered before. So it definitely swayed the many of the battles in the colonists' favor.
Yeah. And shortly after the battles of Lexington and Concord, we see the Declaration of Independence emerge, and that was the final straw really between the British government and the colonies that kind of demonstrated there was no coming back together, only like severance.
And that's where we get July 4th from, Independence Day, because that's when it was drafted. And two of the key guys that drafted it were Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And a famous quote from the Declaration of Independence is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So with that, we kind of see that America wanted to be free and have more rights. They wanted to break away and have freedom.
Yeah. We also see the Declaration of Independence really attack the British government with the list of grievances that it gives, many of which were, we believe, from the British perspective, they felt very over exaggerated with no merit or support.
Yeah, because like one of the many grievances was that the colonists had no representation in Parliament, which was partially true, but at the same time, they did actually have a little bit of representation. It was more of the fact that they didn't have direct representation where they were able to like establish their own elected officials to be able to send to the British monarchy. But they did, in fact, have like their own representatives within the monarchy that spoke for the colonies.
So after all of that, after Lexington Concord, there were multiple more battles. Um, the colonists weren't really as advanced as the British. They didn't have as much resources, but they did have a lot of people. They had a lot of people that were upset with British rule. So a lot of battles went back and forth until the Battle of Saratoga, which was really one of the largest and most tide-turning wars of this revolution. It was a massive loss for the British Army, and it was really the first thing that showed that the colonists might actually be able to win this war and defeat the largest standing army in the world, the British.
And that was the battle where they actually convinced France to join the war, which was a huge turning point. French support gave money, weapons, ammunition, and other essential materials, including leaders for the war. And they were a huge part of the American
Became
victory.
a huge blow to the British for sure.
I think moving on, we can get to the Treaty of Paris, 1783. That was the document that officially ended the war and recognized American independence. So that was a huge win for America.
Yeah, it came quickly right after the siege of Yorktown, where the British troops were surrounded and General Cornwallis had to surrender, and the British were left shocked and like very, very reluctantly and angrily signed the Treaty of Paris, officially ending the American Revolution in favor of the Americans, surprisingly enough, and established their sovereignty as two complete different nations.
Yeah, but one more thing I'd like to add here is that despite the fact that they did sign the Treaty of Paris, many of the British soldiers did not move out. Many of them like stayed in their own forts that were already established in the Americas. This definitely led to many more conflicts later on, including the War of 1812. So, just an important point to consider that even though the British did sign the treaty that said they were going to leave, many of them decided to still stay in America.
And after the war, we had formation of new government. We started with the Articles of Confederation. We soon learned that they were super flawed. For example, the government couldn't impose taxes. And that led to the Constitutional Convention. And eventually, we drafted the Constitution, which has been a huge impact on the whole world, spreading democracy and being a great example of a type of government that is fair and
very lasting to today.
To this day,
I mean, looking at the Supreme Court, that's how they still base their decisions.
Yep, and we have a good government system where we can amend the Constitution if needed, so it's a flexible document.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Constitution definitely also influenced a lot of democratic insurrections later on. I mean, you talk about like the French Revolution, like a lot of those ideals were based in the fact that like if the American colonists can do it, then like the French Revolution, the French populace could also like rise up against their corrupt government and establish their own confederation.
Yeah, I mean, there have already been plenty of revolutions in the world, but really the American one was definitely the largest and the one that most people heard about. That really started a lot of, especially other big ones like the French and Haitian revolutions, were really inspired by this American Revolution, and it really triggered this global spread. Especially once they saw the success of America's government, it triggered a global spread of democracy, similar to the United States of America.
Would definitely be a different world today if America was not its own country and was still joined with Britain.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think like kind of the almost like the what's the word, like what makes the American Revolution so famous is the fact that like it was simply colonists fighting against the like greatest standing army in the world. I mean, the British had
Navy.
Yeah, exactly. Like the British had so many resources, they had better training, they had every reason that like to suppress the colonists. But it really just speaks to the power of democracy and and just the fight for freedom across the world, really.
And I think another big thing that came out of the American Revolution was a national identity. We had symbols created like the American flag and the national anthem, and just fostered a sense of unity and patriotism. And it also led to formation of political parties in America. the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and it kind of jump-started the rest of American history and created what we have today.
Yeah, absolutely. Like so many events in American history, like wouldn't have happened or wouldn't have been like as important um, if it wasn't for the Revolution. So that's all the time we have for today. We thank you for joining us on the Rebels and Revolutionaries podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode about the birth of America. And as always, remember to fight for democracy.